Hello and welcome to the webinar. Hopefully that sound is coming through for you, and thank you for joining me. Longer term, this is a webinar that I'm recording for my Conflict Skills members program as one of the resources that they get access to. But I thought that it might be fun to live stream it at the same time. So welcome if you're watching it during the live stream or afterwards in the re-recording on one of the platforms that I've left it up on. So welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about managing different personality types and workplace conflict. If you don't know me, my name is Simon Good and I'm a workplace mediator now with over 10 years of experience. And a lot of the workplace mediations that I do and a lot of workplace conflict actually is connected to personality differences. It's interesting when they survey different staff about what kind of things they find stressful at work. Workplace conflict is very, very commonly on the top of the list. And when you ask staff what kind of things cause workplace conflict, it's often personality differences, different ways of thinking, different ways of operating, different ways of seeing the same situation. And that can be helpful. It can actually result in high-performing teams if we can manage the differences strategically. But unfortunately, I think we're all familiar with the fallout and tension and drama and exhaustion and distraction and all of the rest of it that comes along with conflict when those personality differences aren't managed well. So today I'm going to be talking about one of the particular frameworks that I find particularly useful myself, the Big Five personality factors. So this is what we're aiming for here. I'll help you become familiar with some of the common frameworks for categorizing personality, ranging from the DISC, the Myers-Briggs, some of those common ones that you might have seen, and then also some of the less common ones like Enneagram, etc. I'll talk about the Big Five personality profile in particular. When I was studying my psychology degree, this was always explained to us as this is the gold standard in terms of these personality metrics. It's very empirically valid. It's something that's quite stable across time with people, and it tends to be reasonably stable across different circumstances that people are in. You're not usually that different according to the Big Five at work life and home life, for example. Whereas DISC or Myers-Briggs or something, people might be dramatically different at home versus what they're like at work and that kind of thing. Whereas Big Five's more stable, also more based in the actual data. I'll talk also about what are known as the subcategories, the more specific differences between people. Like it's good to know, okay, I'm an extrovert and you're an introvert. Let's think about the difference there. But within that category of extroversion and introversion, there are a number of different specific differences that often play out when it comes to workplace conflict, like how proud we are, how much we like to take credit for our achievements versus how much we like to go under the radar and that kind of thing. That might not be necessarily correlated with the fact that you love talking to people at lunchtime. So that's why you would consider yourself to be extroverted. So going into that fine level of detail, of that different layer of analysis, to me is incredibly helpful. And then I'll talk more or less about the way that we can manage some of these differences depending on the situation that we're in, the context, and frankly, the priorities. When should we take more of a firm approach of saying, this is the way that it needs to be? This is the boundary. No, that's not something that I can agree to. And when should we just be accommodating? Where is there opportunities for compromise? And when should we collaborate or even look to avoid the conflict at all? Please let me know if this is useful for you. If you're in the Conflict Skills membership area, you can leave a comment down below and I try to answer the questions as quickly as I can that come through there too. So I think there is a little bit of a risk whenever we talk about types of personality, categories of people, who is neurotypical and who is neurodivergent. And to me, all of these different ways of grouping people, they're inherently inaccurate, if you know what I mean. Like we're maybe lumping people together that actually have quite different, unique differences between them, for example. Or we assume that a particular characteristic of someone will be stable over time. Whereas when I think about difficult conversations, relationships, conflict, it's an extremely fluid thing. There's this constant exchange going on between us, literally between our brains. We co-regulate each other's nervous systems. So the way that I'm speaking, the way that I'm acting, the subtle cues that you pick up on, like my tone of voice or my facial expressions or something, that regulates your nervous system. It gives your brain and body cues about what it might need to do next, how revved up it should be versus how much it should be calm, how much of the fight or flight response might be needed versus how much of the rest and digest, what's going on here. So we co-regulate each other's nervous systems. So even when we're talking about like a difference in expectation for conscientiousness, like you're very frustrated because someone in your workplace doesn't clean up after themselves, that's probably true. But I don't want to oversimplify the dynamics that are going on whenever you decide to talk to that person about it. The reaction that you get will not necessarily be just about what you said to them. It will be about all of the other things that have been going on for them that day and even this week and this month as well. And then as you talk to them today, you might have a different response than when you speak with them tomorrow. And your brain is constantly changing too. I often think about the old Buddhist metaphor of a man never treads in the same river twice, because that's not the same river and he's not the same man. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. After difficult conversations, after we speak to someone, after we listen to them and give them a chance to debrief or have their say, they're different. If we were to measure like the different sections of the brain that are active when they're doing different things, there would be differences going on. And the same is true for you as well, which might mean as well that your capacity for dealing with difficult conversations isn't necessarily always stable. There might be some times when you're better equipped to deal with a pushback or a frustration or something without reacting, and other times when you're a little bit closer to the end of your tether, if you know what I mean. So it's this dynamic exchange, the person A and person B summaries that we talk about, that's just Jim or that's just Dave or whatever. Well, they're just very generalized summaries of what we know about them. The reality is that we don't know the same Dave as the other person sitting next to us knows Dave. We'll probably have very slightly different perspectives on him based on our experiences until this point, and that will change moving forward as well. So we're both constantly changing, and we're always changed by our context, constantly influenced and influencing the people around us. It's challenging when I get called in to do a workplace mediation and people have a very simplistic idea of what's going on in the conflict. And it's like, Simon, can you just fix this? Talk to them both and let them know what's expected, or, give them a reality check or something. And I'm like, okay, well, it's been getting bad now from what you've said 3 years. I'm wondering what kind of a simple process is going to be helpful for achieving long-term solutions. But anyway, the unrealistic client expectations is probably a good topic for a future webinar training, actually. I should jot that down in my notes as potential options. So in a previous video, I've talked about the 5 types of conflict. People in the Conflict Skills membership program also have access to my the essential foundations for managing workplace conflict, I should say. And there I spend a lot of time talking about these types of conflict model as well. The basic idea here is that there are these 5 different factors that drive conflict. Data, like what we've agreed to, the contracts, the agreements, the emails, the scopes of work, the timeframes, etc. Our interests, what I want versus what you want. Our values, what I think should happen versus what you think should happen. And this, I think, is often where the personality differences surface. It's in the value conflict. How quickly should you respond when someone emails you? Is it okay to swear when you're talking to your boss? If someone wants you to do something for them, can they just come and ask you for it? Or should they schedule a meeting and be more considerate of your time and the fact that you might be in the middle of something? These values that we have, and they're often subjective elements that we've developed through our experiences, they influence what we expect from other people around us. And it's not about right and wrong. Like, you think that you should be able to swear when you're talking to your colleagues and I'd prefer not to. Well, we've just got different perspectives there. And I think that's where that conversation about the personality differences has a really fruitful effect, because then we can translate it into behavior. What would I need to do differently then as a result? So at a surface level, if you're finding yourself managing personality differences between people, they might think it's all about the data. I've told them to do this and they agreed to and they haven't done it. Whereas from their perspective, it might be something else. Sure, but my boss asked me to do something else at the last minute. You have to understand that that's a valid excuse. Whereas the other person might think that if you've agreed to do something, you should take responsibility for it, for example. So that would be in that conscientiousness category of the personality differences that I would talk about today in a moment. And if we were navigating that, we might ask the two of them, well, you don't need to agree. It makes sense that you've got different perspectives here. What needs to happen moving forward for the two of you to be able to work together effectively? What do you need from them, and what would you be prepared to do as a result? Then we've got the relationship conflict. I'm so sick of the way that they keep doing this. I've told them not to, or even just the way that they speak or the way that they hold their face or the way that they breathe in the office is annoying me, the way that they eat or something. And then we've got structural conflict, the way that meetings are structured, the way that decisions get made, the way that communication happens and all of that. And as we approach this topic of managing personality differences, as I say, I think value conflict is often the point where this surfaces, but we can consider all 5 of these different options in terms of how to respond. For example, we could go back to the data, clarify how the meetings will be run between the two of them, given that they've got these different ideas about what would work best, or clarifying when Jim will get back to Diana when she emails him, even though Jim has a more flexible way of working and Diana prefers to be more structured. Or we could talk about interests. I know that it's not something that you would naturally normally do, but if you're willing to do it, this is what I can do for you. Let's do a bit of negotiation here and maybe I can help you out if you can come to the party, even though it's not what makes sense to you, what you would normally want, etc. So it's probably value where it shows up, but we can sort of navigate it in each of those other different categories as well. As I say, if you'd like to learn more about that one, check out the Essential Foundations for Managing Workplace Conflict course on my website, by the way. So this also is related to what are called conflict modes. I've talked about this in the Conflict Skills podcast a number of times. These are the 5 different options that we've got for managing any different conflict situation that we come across, really. We could compete, be very firm, be assertive, take a directing kind of approach, be accommodating, etc. So once we've surfaced and figured out what the differences might be that's going on between us, we still need to decide what we're going to do about it. So I'm going to come back to this at the end of the webinar today as well. I just wanted to flag a few of these things because to me, I like having functional understandings of these different elements. I like things that are based in the science as much as possible. That's obviously true. But at least I need a way of thinking about it that then helps me to plan for responding. Whereas if I just think, oh, we've got personality differences and I've got really no ideas about what the 5 options are for responding, well, obviously that's more likely to lead to me feeling overwhelmed or something similar. So what are your goals? How much time have you got at the moment? What's important to you? Maybe it's a difference in personality with one of your workmates. You would need to think about, well, how long are you likely to work with this person? How important is the relationship to you? How important is it to keep them happy, so to speak? Is this a relationship that you would like longer term? Would you like to help them? Maybe you'd like to just set up things that are suitable for them just because you're a supportive person. Maybe it's something else that's going on, other members of the team or something that might be related to this too. If the personality differences were causing less of a problem, what would you like to be seeing more of? And that's, I think, often quite helpful because we're not talking about changing people's personality. It's often about having a future-focused and solution-focused conversation about what we're going to do about these differences. So you can see on the screen here, these are some of the common types of personality measures that psychologists have developed over the years. The DISC model is a very common one connected to workplace behavior. I used to really like the DISC model myself, and I still find it reasonably helpful. There's a good book that's written called Surrounded by Idiots. I really like that one too, and it's in the additional resources of a few of the different lists that I've compiled over the years. It basically uses that DISC profile types to break apart the common idiotic behaviors that you might come across in colleagues, for example, or maybe your boss seems like an idiot and it might explain that they're just working from a different idea of logic, etc. Insights discovery is a really good model that I've used as well in different workshops that I've run. The Enneagram is a very popular model, particularly in different cultural groups or overseas countries. In Australia, I haven't come across it as much, but when I've been overseas, I've seen it a number of times. There's the Jungian characteristics, the phlegmatic, sanguine, choleric, etc. Myers-Briggs personality types is a really common one as well. That's a really also really useful metric that some people naturally resonate with. And then we've got the less scientific options like star signs or blood types as well. Blood types seem to be very common in Korea. I spent a couple of years teaching English in Korea, and for whatever reason, everybody would come up to us and ask two questions always. How old are you and what's your blood type? Age is very important because they've got this very hierarchical structure of the way that they naturally organize themselves. Even in friends groups, they always know who's the oldest kind of thing. And they have different duties and different privileges, I suppose, that go along with that. And then blood type, they seem to think that the blood type was connected to different personalities as well. I don't know, what do you think about that one? We'll just have a quick overview. I'm not going to talk in detail about these, but it can be helpful just to have a bit of familiarity about the common characteristics. So this is the DISC model. It breaks people up into the 4 categories: the dominance, influence, conscientiousness, and steadiness. And you'll have elements of all of them potentially, but most people tend to be one. Sometimes it's one with a bit of a mix of a second one added in there with a bit of flavor. So just looking through that list, where would you put yourself? Are you in that direct, results-oriented kind of framework, or are you the kind of person that likes collaborative processes that would be more in the influence? Do you get annoyed by things like not having a say? Well, you'd probably be in the influence category. If you get annoyed by inconsiderateness and the fact that people are impacted by a change, you might be more in the conscientiousness category. And then if you would just prefer enough notice that you could plan around it, you'd probably be in steadiness. And what about your team or the people that you work with? Can you identify particular people that might fall into particular buckets? When I talk about these types of areas in coaching conversations, obviously the next step that I often talk about is how would you manage that then? But before we get to that, I suppose first it might be helpful to reflect on, how does this play out? Like, you think that they're like this and you're like this. So how often in the day would those differences surface? Is it about your long-term perspectives or your short-term, like how you greet each other in the morning or how you go about allocating tasks, etc.? It's interesting when we pause and think about this, then often our team leaders or our managers or our supervisors' behaviors even make a bit more sense. Not necessarily saying that we agree with them, but it's like we can see where they're coming from in a way. These are the different categories in the Enneagram model: peacemaker, perfectionist, helper, achiever. The individualist is where I probably would suspect that I am. The instigator, they just want change, they want to start things. The loyalist, the enthusiast, etc. Again, this can be helpful even at a surface level, just to look at it and reflect on, where would you put yourself? What about the other people around you? How do those differences play out day to day in terms of workplace conflict, workplace communication? This is the Insights Discovery model, the cool blue, fiery red, earth green, sunshine yellow. Similar in many ways to DISC, I guess. The D might be the fiery reds, the yellow would be the sunshine, the eyes would be the sunshine yellow, I should say. So again, it's like, what's your focus on? The results, having things that are in control? Well, that might mean then that when conflict comes up, the kinds of things that trigger you is when someone tells you that there might be a problem, but you don't have the full information. That's the kind of thing that a red would not sit well with. Potential uncertainty they do not like, or carelessness or a lack of detail. That's the kind of thing that would rub the blue up the wrong way. So we're all going to have different preferences, different things that we naturally resist, and different expectations of one another as a result, of course, won't we? I like this Insights Discovery model because you can apply it at that simple 4-color way, or you can think about it in the subcategories as well. I've just included what that looks like there too. It's interesting, like if you think you're a yellow, would you be more in the inspirer kind of category, or the motivator kind of category, or the helper kind of category? There's a little bit of nuance that we can see emerging here. On a good day, what's the blue like? What's the fiery red like? On a bad day, what's the fiery red like? On a good day, the earth green is like the glue that holds the team together. They want to hang out after work, have a coffee, have beers, go away camping. They like the sense that everyone's a family where we work, etc. But when there's conflict going on, they often find that very overwhelming. They become overly sensitive. They misinterpret what the other people are saying, often take things in a personal kind of way. I wonder if that's more like you, or maybe you've dealt with people that sounds like. And then finally, here's that Myers-Briggs type, I think the eyes indicator, I can't remember. Extroversion, introversion, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, judging and perceiving. My wife really likes this one, the MBTI different types. I find it okay, but to me, I'm probably across a number of the different categories, so I've had a little bit of a hard time applying it personally. But what I've noticed is that particular people tend to resonate with different models for whatever reason, which is why I wanted to include them here. You don't need to memorize this or look in great detail, but you can see these are the subcategories of the Myers-Briggs model. There's these 16 different categories. So you'll often see professional development workshops talking about the 16 types of people or something. That's the model that they're often basing that on. So let's get to the one that I mentioned that all of my lecturers constantly talked about as the gold standard when it comes to personality. It's the big 5 personality factors: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I probably wouldn't necessarily think about doing them in this order if I was reflecting or doing a test or something, but this is the way that it's easiest to remember because it's the acronym OCEAN, OCEAN. So we're going to go through what each of these different categories look like at a high level first, and then I'll explain those subcategories, the subdomains within each of those. But with Myers-Briggs, it's sort of like each dimension is, what would you call it? Like there's 2 poles. There's introversion here and extroversion here. Whereas in the big 5 personality characteristics, it's not like that. There's only extroversion, and then you can be high in extroversion or low in extroversion. So you could be high in openness or low in openness, high in neuroticism, etc. Now, arguably, these are not good and bad, positive and negative. In Myers-Briggs and the Insights Discovery and DISC, I think that's definitely true. All of them are equally valid, and you can imagine a good team being comprised of all of the different groups, I guess, like all of these different people working well together. Whereas when it comes to the big 5, people don't necessarily think about them all in a neutral kind of way. Neuroticism, for example, includes things like your likelihood to feel overwhelmed, or your likelihood to display anger when you're provoked. Openness might mean that you've got very fixed ideas, very rigid structure, and you have challenges managing change, for example. Somebody who's low in agreeableness might irritate the people that they work with. They might not be willing to go with the flow when the majority of people want a particular thing. So you often find that in recruitment, when people are hiring new staff, they use this big 5 personality, sort of one of these different inventories as a tool for weeding out the potential candidates that might not be a good fit. Now, that's something that we're all going to have a slightly different ethical view about. Should you not even interview people that are not naturally agreeable? Well, it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about, well, what effect would that have over the long term of the team and the culture that develops if we keep just hiring people that are highly agreeable? I often think about government departments, that this might very well be a good example of what happens here. And then they become more change resistant. People are almost like managing as second generation settlers. They've come in and inherited the processes. They're not the kind of people that come up with the processes from scratch. So let's go through that, as I say, in a little bit of detail, starting with openness. So somebody who's high in openness, they would be naturally curious, more imaginative, creative. They often enjoy being creative as well as they have that ability. They tend to be more open to trying new things, open to new change that's being introduced within an organization, and tend to be less conventional, both in the ideas that they come up with and the way that they approach problems, but also in the way that they work. Like they might like to come up with their own version of doing a one-on-one meeting with their staff, whereas someone who's low in openness would be perfectly happy just to follow the template that you've provided them with. Someone who's low in openness, by comparison, are often quite predictable. They're not as imaginative. They often like the facts, the data, give me the information. They're uncomfortable with change, or they might be more uncomfortable for a longer period, potentially. They often like to stick to routine. I can think of a number of people in my personal life that have exactly the same breakfast every day, exactly the same cup of tea at exactly the same time every morning. They pack exactly the same kind of lunch for themselves each day, etc. They tend, of course, to not mind then inheriting those traditions from their parents. The people that do that, they often live a very similar lifestyle to the generation before them, of course, whereas high in openness, they often like to be trailblazers and come up with it all for themselves. So you'd often see, I'll just read a few of the other different notes that have emerged in the research here. High openness is often associated with higher innovation. It's associated with more creativity, but particularly in artistic and scientific fields, there's been data showing that. People high in openness tend to have more liberal political views. Studies show that people high in openness tend to hold more liberal attitudes. They are more likely to have entrepreneurial success, which is interesting. More open people tend to do better in business. They're more likely to have a successful venture. They're more efficient. High openness people tend to react positively when they get told about KPIs or individual responsibility, etc., but negatively when... So in other words, they become very good individual performers, but they might not necessarily be the best team players. That high openness in team efficiency, you can imagine if you've got 5 highly open people all together, well, they might never be able to make a decision because they just constantly want to do more brainstorming and come up with more options. Interesting, it's also related to marital satisfaction. In marriages where one partner scores lower than the other on openness, there is likely to be marital dissatisfaction and also loneliness. People who score high in openness, more likely to experience feeling lonely. It's interesting, isn't it? Some of those results that emerge of the data when we consider it. And as I say, this is a reasonably stable characteristic across time. And it's also one that we can use reasonably accurately across different cultural backgrounds as well. So if you're wanting to think about, well, how are you when it comes to openness, you could consider questions like, well, do you enjoy trying new activities or do you prefer sticking to familiar routines? How often do you find yourself daydreaming or exploring more abstract kind of ideas? Are you drawn to art, music, drama, poetry, other creative pursuits? And how comfortable are you with change and uncertainty in your life? You might see that difference between couples emerging when they're planning for what kind of a holiday that they want. Someone high in openness wants to go somewhere new. They want to keep their options open when it comes to the itinerary. Someone low in openness would, of course, want everything to be very planned. They'll have a spreadsheet very well developed, looking at the options and comparing different people's reviews, etc., because they don't want to waste that opportunity. They want to make sure that they're getting something that's worth it, so to speak. And that might mean going back to the same place again and again and again. So the next factor is conscientiousness. People who are high in conscientiousness are often described as quite competent. They do what they say that they're going to do and they finish what they start. Someone low in conscientiousness often would become more distracted and they leave things less complete, so they might not follow through and be consistent. Someone high in conscientiousness would be more organised, low conscientiousness people more disorganised. You see this sometimes in different people's desks. If you know someone and they've got a very messy desk or their filing systems all over the shop in their computer, well, it's probably that they're in the low conscientiousness category as opposed to high. More dutiful, like they'll do the right thing even when no one's looking. They'll still show up even when they're tired. They'll still come to work even when they're a little bit under the weather, etc. They're achievement striving. They want to make sure that they get the stars, they tick all the boxes, they get all of the tasks marked complete on their to-do list. They're self-disciplined. They're not so much thinking about external punishments or something. It's like this intrinsic motivation to do the right thing, to have been thorough, etc. And they tend to operate in a way that's more considerate. They don't leave work for other people to clean up. They're not going to just chuck their coffee mug in the sink at the kitchen and just walk off. Now, some people, as I said, they do actually screen for this conscientiousness as part of recruitment. And you can very easily imagine how someone leaving their mug in the sink and walking off would contribute to workplace conflict. But how do we manage this is a very interesting question. You could talk to the low conscientiousness person about doing something differently, but often I find that using structure as a way of mitigating this is more effective. For example, having a roster so that everyone's responsible for doing the dishes one day a week or something. So then if they're leaving it there to clean up, at least you can do it to them and they'll pitch in and clean up their fair share as well. But you'd need to think about things like, how important is it for you to keep your commitments and meet deadlines? If it's very important, then you might be high in conscientiousness. Do you like to plan ahead, or do you prefer to act spontaneously? How organized do you keep your living and working spaces? How easily can you resist temptations or distractions when you're focusing on a task? If you've got the lolly machine up the hallway at your office, how frequently are you visiting it? How frequently are you thinking about visiting it? And when you go and visit it, do you gobble up then the whole bag of snacks afterwards, or do you just have a few of them? Are you prone to immoderation? It's these kind of elements. Agreeableness is the next area to consider. People who are high in agreeableness, they tend to be more trusting and they elicit more trust from the other people around them. They forgive as well. They're willing to give you a second chance, etc. They tend to be more straightforward. They would prefer for things to be okay between them and the people around them. So largely they will ask you, what do you need? And then think about whether or not they can help you with it. They tend to be more altruistic. They find a sense of reward or fulfillment almost in helping others. They might be more compliant. They go with the flow. If their boss tells them to change something, they just do it. They tend to be more modest. They're not often looking for acclaim or public recognition. They might be more sympathetic and empathetic. So that I suppose the two elements there is that they might experience the emotions of other people. That would be the sympathetic layer. And they tend to be more able to understand the emotions of other people, which is the empathetic layer. So those two elements there, they feel the hurt of the other person and they get what it's like. And they can communicate that with them more effectively. Whereas someone low in agreeableness, well, first of all, they might not be able to put themselves in the other people's shoes. And also then they're not necessarily able to demonstrate that same level of empathy, whereas, the more agreeable people would. So if you're more skeptical, more demanding, you might be insulting, whether that's inadvertently blurting something out or you don't mind deliberately pointing out other people's flaws. If you're more stubborn, if you don't mind the public acclaim, you might be less sympathetic and less caring. Well, you're probably low in agreeableness. Actually, I think that I'm relatively low in agreeableness, especially when it comes to mediators. I think pretty frequently they're high in agreeableness, to be honest. But I know that that's caused me a number of different challenges when it comes to workplace conflict over the years, and I see it playing out in mediations as well. So you might ask yourself a question like, how easily do you trust others? How quick are you to give them the benefit of the doubt? Do you assume that something else has come up, or do you assume that they've deliberately done this to get back at you or to hurt you, etc.? How important is it to you to avoid conflicts, to maintain harmony? Are you the kind of person that doesn't like to make waves? Are you the kind of person that finds confrontations very overwhelming? Do you find it easy to empathize with other people's emotions and perspectives? And how often do you put other people's needs before your own? Do you just dump the mug in the kitchen at the lunchroom at work and then drop and run? Or are you the kind of person that cleans up everybody else's dishes as well, because you don't like the thought of somebody else walking in and seeing a big mess that they didn't make and now all of a sudden they need to clean it up? So extroversion is the next of these factors. People high in extroversion tend to be more sociable. They're energized by social interaction. That often means that they can tolerate long periods of hanging out with people, traveling together with work colleagues. A high extroversion person wouldn't mind that at all. Whereas after a few hours of being with a group of people, low extroversion people would feel like they just want to tear their fingernails off. This is insanely intolerable. Just making small talk again is something that's so exhausting. They find it much more draining. High extroversion people tend to be more excitement seeking. They don't mind being the center of attention, and they tend to be more outgoing as well. Low extroversion people, by comparison, more happy in solitude. They don't mind being by themselves. Fatigued by too much social interaction. They tend to be quite reflective, uncomfortable being the center of attention, and more reserved as well. Where would you put yourself? What about the people around you? Have you noticed a difference in the way that people are energized by social interaction versus the other people that are completely exhausted? And what about you? Do you feel energized or drained after spending time in large social gatherings? How comfortable are you being the center of attention? Do you prefer working in teams or independently? And how often do you initiate conversations with strangers? Now, as I mentioned, I think that a lot of the benefit to these different categories come when we look at the subcategories, and extroversion in particular. I think it's useful to get the different dimensions within that. We'll cover those in a moment. Finally, though, let's look at neuroticism. This is the last of those big 5 characteristics. People high in neuroticism tend to be more anxious, more hostile, more easily stressed, more self-conscious. They often think about what other people are thinking about them. How am I coming across? How am I being judged? How am I being perceived? It can be quite an excruciating thing for highly neurotic people, to be frank, including myself, because it's something that we often ruminate on. You don't have the full information about what somebody else thinks about you. So constantly what's going on is that there might be a problem, there might be a problem, there might be a problem. Whereas people who are low in neuroticism, well, they don't often care what other people think about them, and that doesn't really cross their mind how they're being perceived. They can take me or leave me. They tend to be more vulnerable naturally, more vulnerable to distress, overwhelm, but also potentially then to coinciding physical illnesses. Their immune system might become compromised as a result of conflict that they're dealing with. And they often experience more dramatic shifts in mood, sudden anger, sudden distress. Whereas people who are low in neuroticism, they tend to be more laid back, more calm, more emotionally stable, more confident, more naturally resilient, and rarely sad or depressed. Again, though, this one, I think, this often isn't something that you would observe at the surface level. Like you might see someone that you work with seem really laid back, but when you pause and think about it, they are hyper aware of what other people are thinking about them. So it's possible that maybe underneath the surface, there's a bit of that self-consciousness that could be playing out. What is the context that you're in like? How are the people around you when it comes to neuroticism? Are there particular areas that you've noticed people that you work with are more hostile than others? Is it when the enterprise bargaining agreement is discussed, or your boss is normally perfectly fine, but when there's a visit from the big bosses from the head office, all of a sudden he becomes overwhelmed? What kind of patterns do you notice? So you could think about things like, how often do you worry about things that might go wrong? Do you find yourself pre-living conversations, rehearsing for how you're going to deal with particular challenges? How easily do you bounce back from setbacks or disappointments? Do you tend to dwell on negative experiences, or do you just kind of let them go? Duck under the water, whatever, we can just deal with it. How confident do you feel in your ability to handle life's challenges that go along with those as well? So we've gone through each of those big 5 factors: the openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, and agreeableness. Now, as I mentioned, each of those have these different sub-dimensions that are connected to them. So for neuroticism, the subcategories that are often identified is anxiety, How prone are you to worry, to that generalized sense of catastrophe is imminent, the sky is falling, things are not okay, or maybe more specific worries, rumination, intrusive thoughts? How prone are you to hostility and anger? Do you display the frustration when you're feeling it? Do you show all of that on your face? Are you prone to depression, the withdrawing, isolation, feeling helpless, feeling hopeless? Are you overly self-conscious? Are you the kind of person that does it's like you've become hyper vigilant about any potential threats to your ego, to the way that other people are perceiving you, that someone might be blaming you for something, someone might be thinking a negative thing about you. This is the kind of thing that makes people then constantly aware of how they're sitting, how they're standing, how they smell, how far apart they're sitting, all of this kind of stuff. And that's another layer that their executive function section of their brain needs to pay attention to. They might be more impulsive. They might be more prone to immoderation, smashing down 3 chocolate bars when they're feeling a bit overwhelmed about a meeting that didn't go well, drinking more than they should after work, which then means they don't sleep well and they show up at work slightly hungover, etc. And that vulnerability to stress. Can they deal with long periods of being busy? Can they deal with long periods of constant change? Can they deal with high levels of uncertainty? These would all be correlated with those subcategories of neuroticism. So you can see, right, that someone might be a really angry kind of person, like people around them describe them as a hothead, but they're pretty confident. They're not the kind of person that worries about a lot of things. So just saying you're high in neuroticism doesn't really tell the story, doesn't it? We need to look at those subcategories. And if we were a team leader managing that team, for example, and one person is very prone to show anger in the meetings, maybe they're spitting the dummy and, raising their voice and interrupting people or something, but somebody else on the team might not be like that. They keep things very calm and stable. I suppose we could talk to them and say, look, I've noticed this difference in the way that the two of you communicate. It seems like, person A, you're a little bit like this. You like to give things some thought, and it sounds like for you, it's something that percolates away behind the scenes before you give a response. Whereas person B, I've noticed that you tend to have more of an emotional reaction in the room. And for you, it can be quite helpful discussing that, even as a way of normalizing it or checking whether you're on the right track or something else might be going on for you. Have I got that right? So it's like neither of you are wrong, but I can see this difference is playing out here. And then we would ask a question like, so how are the two of you going to figure this out? What needs to happen moving forward to make sure that this doesn't create additional problems? What needs to happen moving forward within the team so that we can keep communication positive and on track, so that we can keep the projects moving in the right direction, so that we can whatever. It's like, what do you need to do? If you're a collaborative kind of manager, you might be the kind of person that says, what can we do? Personally, especially as a mediator, I'm much more inclined to say, what do the two of you need to keep in mind? What do the two of you need to focus on to make sure that this difference in your styles doesn't create problems moving forward? Now, sometimes they do come up with practical options. Let's do this. Let's include this person in the meeting because they're a bit of a diluting factor. Fine. But sometimes just talking about the difference, normalizing it, and giving them the opportunity to just think about, well, how is this going to be managed? Like, what are we going to do? Even if they don't come up with a specific strategy, you're sort of minimizing the chance of it all of a sudden erupting. It's like we've preemptively dealt with it to some extent, and I think reduced some of that reactivity that can emerge when it feels more chaotic, it's out of the blue and unexpected, and there's a high level of uncertainty that's attached to it. For extroversion, the subcategories are different. It's things like warmth. You're the kind of person that smiles, that gives compliments, that asks people how their kids are going and this kind of thing, like a kind, warm, caring kind of person. It might be things like gregariousness. Are you willing to help other people out? Are you the life of the party? Do you love telling jokes and mingling, and you'll go around and talk to the new person if they don't have someone to talk to make them feel welcome? You might be a very assertive kind of person. That's a different dimension of extroversion, isn't it? That's different to always wanting to hang out and socialize. Are you the kind of person that's very direct? And again, this might be a difference that you're managing within your team. One person is the kind of person that calls it how they see it. And they're often proud of that, right? Like they think, well, I just call a spade a spade. You always know where you stand with me. And it's something that they think is admirable, even something that other people should aspire to. And then you might have someone else working with them that's like, why do they need to be such a drama queen? Do we need to get into a debate about every single minor decision? Can't we just go to work and get on with it, kind of thing? And so we've got these different perspectives, and it's not about right and wrong, good and bad. It's like, look, it seems like you've got these different expectations, these different ways of working, these different preferences, whatever. How are you going to figure it out? What do we need to think about within the team? How are we going to communicate in a way that can overcome some of those differences? Now, there might be that there's problems that are being caused and you can observe that, but I think even ahead of time, we can say we don't want this to become an issue. What's going to work here? So assertiveness, the activity level that people like. Some people really like to be going. They hate it when they've crossed the last item off their to-do list. Other people find it very taxing to be constantly rushing from one thing to the next. Are you the kind of person that really likes excitement, or are you the kind of person that prefers routine and to know what to expect? And then are you the kind of person that displays cheerfulness, the positive emotions, or not? Again, this might be something that you notice some difference within your team. Someone might roll their eyes when an announcement gets made in the team meeting. And if you wanted to talk to them afterwards, it's probably not going to work to say, why are you being such a jerk? Why are you inconsiderate? Why are you not caring? Why are you being disrespectful and rolling your eyes? Then of course what we're going to get back is defensiveness and resistance. No, I wasn't. Easy for you to say, you're not affected. Whereas I think it's more helpful to say something like, look, this is an area where we're all going to have different expectations about. Frankly, it's something that we've got subjective values on. You might not necessarily think it's a big deal how you look when someone's speaking to you. But I've noticed that when you do this kind of a facial expression, like crease your brow, or when you don't respond when the person asks you a question or something like that, I've noticed that it creates tension within the other members of the team. Now, that's not necessarily something that we always should avoid, but I'm not sure if it's the most helpful start to these kind of meetings. Could you do this differently? And I'm hoping this might be the result. This might be the difference as a result. So when they ask you, even if you don't understand why, would you be willing just to do what they've asked you for now, even though to you it doesn't make much sense? And it's really for the good of that group and just to get the meeting off to a smooth start. How does that sit with you? So I'm not saying you're wrong to feel this way. I'm saying even though you feel this way, could you do this differently? And we want to focus on the behavior. What's the thing that we want them to stop or change? Openness to experience is similar. You can see the subcategories there are things like fantasy, your imagination, your preference for aesthetic, your inclination towards artistic interests and endeavors, feelings and emotionality. You're the kind of person that feels very strong emotions. Are you the kind of person that likes the adventurous, exploring, you've never been here before kind of thing? You like running new projects. You like setting up new initiatives within the organization. Maybe you're the kind of person that loves brainstorming. You like the intellectual challenge of grappling with a complex idea and coming up with a comprehensive solution. Not everyone's like that. Some people just want to be told, this is the plan, this is what we're doing, and then they can go through the ABC. And are you the kind of person that has these more liberal views? Can you tolerate differences in terms of perspectives versus where do you think that such a thing as common sense or such a thing as maturity exists? If someone's mature, if they have common sense, what would you be expecting them to do? Someone high in that openness category would mean that, I don't know, you're different to me. Your brain works different to me. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to work together. Someone low in openness would be like, this is the way that we work within this team. We're going to decide whether or not you're a good fit. Agreeableness, are they the kind of person that trusts others? Do they tend to be more straightforward? Do they keep their cards close to their chest? Are they more altruistic? Some people are naturally more willing to help each other out, and they think that people should do that. It's part of being considerate, isn't it? Helping each other out. More likely to cooperate when you ask them to, etc. What's modesty like for these different individuals? Are they the kind of person that really wants recognition for their achievements? Maybe, maybe not. I've been a little bit surprised myself at how quite senior people sometimes seem almost petty in the kinds of things that they become obsessed with. They didn't make me a senior accreditation of this, or they didn't acknowledge that I did the majority of the work on that project, etc. So that might be another of these differences that emerge with yourself and the people that you're dealing with or within your team. How likely are they to be tender-minded, wanting to make an exception for them, give them a discount, etc.? Someone high in agreeableness might not be the best negotiator because they tend to just give in when the other person pushes them for something. And then you can see conscientiousness is the final category there. Some people naturally more competent, they place more value in self-efficacy. They think that you should be able to stand on your own 2 feet. These are the kind of people that often really value having financial independence or having specific qualifications under their belt or formal accreditations. They often prefer things to be more ordered. They like organizing and they like things to be organized. They have that sense of duty. It's like, if we're a team, then we should help each other. If we're as a team, then these are our obligations to one another. Whereas people low in that dimension would be more individualistic. They're just looking out for themselves. More achievement striving. Do they want to become excellent? Do they want to be the best in their city at this particular area? Or are they happy just to be okay and get reasonably good feedback from clients? What are they like in terms of self-discipline, willpower? Will they follow through with what they tell you that they're going to do? And how deliberate or cautious do they prefer to be? Again, these are all dimensions where we can observe and manage differences. We might notice, like even with my wife, for example, she prefers to be much more organized. So when we're going on holidays, I don't mind sitting down and doing a little bit of planning. I need to deliberately sit down and go through options and basically look at the spreadsheet that she's put together because she likes things to be in place. She doesn't want to show up on the day and we don't have a ticket because it's not open or something like that. Whereas for me, I'm low in that dimension of my conscientiousness, whereas we might be more similar in others. Like we don't hassle each other for doing housework or something. We both just kind of naturally do it. It's not really something that causes a lot of tension. Whereas I can imagine in other households, a difference in the sense of obligation, picking up after yourself might cause relationship collapse, to be frank. And the same thing is true in work relationships. The classic example is the team project at university, having team members that don't pull their weight. And I mean, frankly, that's very annoying. But there you've really got limited number of options that you can deal with. You can be very direct and assertive with them, be very compromise, etc. I think here, talking about personality differences introduces another way of building in a bit of leverage. Because we're saying to them, look, I know that we don't see things in the same way. Some students really value university. They want to make sure that they get 100% in every possible grade they can. Other people, they've got different priorities in their life. So university is just one of the factors that they're managing. For me, this is important. So this is what I would like as a result. Could we organise to meet frequently? And if it's all right with you, let's maybe see if we can get the draft done in the first few weeks, even if after that we won't have a lot more work to do as it gets closer to the time when we submit. But I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying why are you so considerate as to not want to meet with me. I'm not saying why are you so lazy as to not pulling your weight in the project. I'm just saying, look, we're going to have different ideas about how important this is, even how important this specific project is in amongst the subject that we're in at uni. Let's talk about how we can manage those differences. What do you think? How does that resonate with you thinking about those big 5 personality characteristics there? Now, if you would like, I've got a link here where you can do a 120 question version of the test. It also spits out a really excellent report that summarizes what you're likely to be like, what kind of things you prefer and what kind of things then that you can adjust, or you might need to take a flexible approach to prevent workplace conflict yourself. I absolutely love it. The only thing about this particular link is that the form looks a bit ugly. So don't stress if it looks like it was made in 1988 or something like that. It's a free one, but it's the most accurate of those ones with the subcategories as well, which I really like. So what should we do? I've gone through and explained all of those different elements where we might encounter the differences between ourselves and other people, or where we might need to manage personality differences within our team. I think this is where we need to consider our goals and then take a strategic approach. Some people have a default way of dealing with conflict, and I think personality differences is no different. They might say it's my way or the highway. This is the kind of team we need to have. This is what we need from each of you as a result. And they're more in that competing approach. Other people, they're much more willing to be accommodating. They see it as important to be considerate, etc. They're probably more agreeable themselves, so they're much more likely to accommodate. To me, I think if we develop emotional intelligence, what we're really doing is improving our capacity to choose the right one, depending on the moment and depending on what's at stake. So when should we be collaborative? Sit down with the team and talk it through. Send an email to the other person saying, I've noticed this pattern. I don't know if I'm misreading things here. Could we talk about doing something different moving forward? Because I don't want this to continue, or it's creating this problem. We could take that collaborative approach of what works for you, what's going to work for me, or maybe we just compromise. Look, it seems like we've got different ideas about these deadlines. For me, if you tell me it's going to be there at the end of the week, that's something that I'm working around. If you think that there's going to be a delay, could you let me know sooner? So then I'll have advance notice and I can factor that into the rest of the moving pieces in the project. So again, I'm not necessarily saying I want you to agree with me, deadlines are important. I'm saying when there's a delay, could you at least do this? Or if we're going to delay it, don't delay it by this much. Or if we're going to delay it, could we do it in this area but not this, kind of thing. The compromise is where nobody gets 100% of what they want, but at least then you can move on. And so you'll need to think strategically about, well, what's at stake here? How important is this relationship? What kind of problems are going to develop if things don't improve? And what's it going to cost me to deal with it? And I think realistically, sometimes that compromise or accommodate just makes sense. Sometimes even avoiding conflict. Obviously, it's not going to create long-term solutions, but if you've noticed a bit of rumbling going on within your team or something, maybe this isn't the time and place to deal with it. Or maybe you see an issue where there's personality clash happening, but you're not the right person to deal with it. You're a senior manager and it would be better for one of the local guys to deal with it in the first instance. It really depends, doesn't it? So I think that ability to pause and reflect and just think about what might be going on here essentially becomes a superpower. Just by choosing strategically which approach we should take, we minimize the amount of drama and issues that come up as a result of conflict that isn't managed well. But I don't know, what do you think about all of that? How does that sit with you? I often love finishing with this. It's a quote from the Positive Parenting Program. That course encourages parents to think about, how can I be bigger, calmer, kinder, and wiser? I know a lot of people who are in the conflict skills program, they are caring people. They care about their staff. They care about the people around them, and they really do want to support them. And when we think about conflict and managing some of these differences, I think getting on the same page, understanding each other, and sometimes even understanding a bit more about ourselves, it improves our capacity for understanding them, seeing that inner child, seeing their inner motivations or the fear that might be driving it or whatever else it is. And then we're much better able to support them if that's something that we aspire to. Like by being able to calm ourselves down, pause and consider, we increase the depth that we're viewing the same situation using, and therefore we can calibrate our responses more accurately. As I say, I'd love to know your thoughts. If you're watching this live, just put a comment down below. If you're on a platform where you can leave a like or something like that, I'd be grateful. If you're in the Conflict Skills membership program, you can ask a question down below if anything that I've talked about has twigged something in you. Even if you've got a particular thought or something that's percolating away, that's often very helpful for the other people to hear about as well. I think sometimes just normalizing the experiences that we're going through can be helpful in itself, which frankly is one of the reasons why I wanted to set up the Conflict Skills Members Program initially at all. But thank you very much for watching. Hopefully see you in the Conflict Skills podcast, one of my training workshops in the future, or maybe we might work together in some format down the track. Thank you again. Bye for now.